Welcome to the Project Exodus podcast series on OFM podcasts. Join us weekly as we explore critical topics on addiction and recovery through insightful discussions, heartfelt interviews, and practical Q&A sessions with members of the Project Exodus team and community. Project Exodus is dedicated to making expert recovery interventions accessible to all communities. Through this podcast series, our hope is that understanding and support for those on the path to recovery will be enhanced. Whether you're personally recovering, supporting someone else, or just curious, join us in building a community of awareness, compassion, and hope.
Welcome back to the Project Exodus podcast series. So good to have you here with us. Today we are going to be discussing the supporter journey, and I've got Gareth and Kerry here with us. Gareth is one of the team members of Project Exodus and Kerry is one of the directors. And it's just awesome having you guys here again today.
Baie dankie.
Thank you.
Cool.
Good to be here.
Today we're just going to be discussing the journey of a supporter. So what's the difference between the supporter's recovery and the addiction recovery? You know, is there a difference there? What's the, you know?
I think the entrance is often different. You know, often a supporter will come in wanting to know how to best support their loved one in addiction, and we try and discourage that because actually the focus needs to be on their own journey. So, for example, someone who's walked with someone in addiction will often find that the focus is always on the person in addiction.
Yeah.
And in the process, there are behaviours that are learned by the supporter, and it's not the greatest word, but it's the word we understand. There are behaviours learned that accommodate that behaviour and accommodate to that behaviour, which are not helpful and can be quite destructive, self-destructive to the supporter. So it's also learning, how do I, as a supporter, strengthen myself? What is the journey that I need to go on? Do I understand boundaries? Do I understand my locus of control? What can I control? What is not for me to control? And there are many other facets. What is enabling? What is codependency? A big word being thrown around at the moment.
Yeah.
And then actually self-care.
Yeah.
I need to start looking after myself and focusing on myself and strengthening myself. Yeah.
Gareth, you want to add anything?
I agree with Kerry on that, and that covers it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then what are the similarities between the addiction recovery and supporters recovery?
I think going back to what Kerry was saying in terms of behaviour, that addiction is not just substance use or abuse, but it's also what we call process that leads to the behaviour. So the behaviour is the underlying sort of acting out in behaviour, and I think that can be that is one of the big things that supporters do without realizing it, without realizing they in that cycle of dysfunction, and I think that's where a lot of the denial comes in, especially when supporters first come into recovery.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you will have touched on is that if we think of an iceberg, the addiction is that top 10% of that iceberg. The 90% of the iceberg is below the waters, and there are dysfunctional, we call them maladaptive mechanisms that are supporting the addiction and feed into the addiction. But those maladaptive mechanisms are things we all battle with. So we all might battle with shame, or we might battle with toxic sort of relationships or emotional dysregulation. We need to work on that. Various aspects. There might be unprocessed trauma. There might be some form of abuse that has never been dealt with. So that 90% is not just about the person in addiction, but it's about all of us. And it might be different aspects of those maladaptive mechanisms. But we all battle. We all have things to work with. None of us are perfect.
Yeah, for sure.
We're all growing. So, so that's kind of where the focus is, with maybe different nuances in that process,
And then with both of your experience in supporters recovery and kind of journeying with people, what are the most common dysfunctional behaviour that you do find in the supporters?
From my side, I think the one that comes to the top of my mind would be the flawed beliefs, and to look at even something like rejection, for an example, that from a supporter's perspective can, the not wanting rejection from their loved one or significant other can lead to a tremendous amount of enabling, needing the value, needing the validation, yet allowing a whole lot of others. So a lot of conditioning comes into play, and that's where the healthy knowledge or understanding of boundaries need to come in, of the codependency aspect, and so on. So it's about conquering the flawed beliefs, which it may sound fairly easy, but it's a process.
And kind of those flawed beliefs lead into unrealistic expectations
Yes.
of both the supporter and the person in addiction recovery.
Right.
So actually they've started attending groups, so they're going to be fine now. Their whole life is going to shift.
Right,
But
yeah.
it takes time
Sure.
to kind of invent your life, reinvent the direction of your life. So it's those unrealistic expectations as well.
Yeah.
And then definitely codependency is a big one. So often as a supporter, we would fight the battle for the person in addiction. So we would so if it's a pornography addiction, we would control that the accountability software comes to us. We control the TV remote. We control it. We try and control it. But actually all we're doing is we're doing the work for the person, so they don't really have to do the work. You know, so it's actually stepping out from doing the work for them and also being codependent on, if they're not doing well, then I'm not doing well. So how can I be strong regardless of them doing
how
well?
they're doing.
And then the other thing is the enabling behavior, where I don't want them to experience the negative consequences of the addiction. So I step in to protect them from those realistic negative consequences. We don't want, obviously, the extreme negative consequences of death, jail, and so on. But if I prevent them from experiencing those negative consequences, then there's no motivation to actually adjust life or adjust their lifestyle. So codependency and enabling flawed beliefs are big factors. Yeah.
Okay. And if codependency was, say, the one side of the coin, what would be the positive side? Like, how would you actually deal with codependency?
Well, the opposite side would be interdependency. And I think that's part of the process, part of the journey, is moving from a space of codependency where I'm reliant on the other person to get my worth, to actually being okay with who I am and being strong or being me, not needing the other person to be me, and walking that first before coming back together as a interdependent relationship.
And what often happens is there is a movement kind of from codependency to independence, so kind of a benevolent detachment, dissociation, and then it's trying to find that balance, that interdependence between the two. What's a healthy dependence? What needs to still be independent? And it's just so often, I know for me, there was that swing from codependency to I reached a place where I was independent. I had to function independently in order to survive. And so part of my journey has been learning to be interdependent, healthy interdependence.
Very important.
Yeah.
And I think the importance, Gerhardus, I think the importance there is in early recovery. I think it's quite it is important to perhaps have that independence to regain my own ground, my own self, before I can then venture and go through a journey of how that looks in a relationship.
So if we look at like significant others, like husband and wife or spousal relationship, what does interdependence look like? Like what is a healthy interdependence in?
I can answer that. So for me, one of the things so my husband battled with a pornography addiction. So one of the things I would do is, if there were ladies' camps, for example, I wouldn't go, because if I went, then he was more likely to use pornography while I was away. So I was trapped. As much as he was enslaved, I was enslaved as well. So part of that was to recognize that actually I'm not responsible for what he does. If he chooses to use while I'm away, or if he doesn't, that's his choice. But it was to actually, no, I need to look after myself. It wasn't neglecting him. For us, it actually did take a period of separation in order for us to come back together in a healthy way. We had to break a dysfunctional dance kind of thing, sort of toxic ways of interacting, and learn to engage in healthy ways again. Yeah.
Okay. And Gareth, what do you think? Do you have anything you want to add?
In terms of that dynamic in spousal relationship, I think it was not. I think for me, it was not allowing my wife to always be right.
He said it. He said it.
And I think in a codependency thing where maybe I value how she is, then I'm feeling fine, that's often the case. So it was being able to say, okay, well, actually it doesn't matter if, well, not it doesn't matter, but in certain circumstances, actually, her behavior is incorrect. It's not good, and I can say that or voice my and communicate that without then feeling that I've done something wrong.
Sure.
And I think that's a big thing for supporters or significant others, is learning to find their voice again. Because in order to avoid conflict, the supporter or the significant other will back off and start to lose their voice. So it's actually learning to express, but to express well, not because we can also express in a way that gets people's backs up. So how do I express appropriately or voice myself appropriately in a situation? So that's also a big thing in that journey. And I think also, I thought you were going to go there, but you didn't. Often someone in addiction, they have no freedom of choice. They're kind of caught in this space of they have to do this thing, and they've kind of lost their freedom of a choice, and recovery is about finding that freedom of choice. But as a significant other, I can also try and remove their freedom of choice and control their freedom of choice, which is also unhelpful to the journey. So I need to respect their freedom of choice to do what they decide to do, and focus on my own journey, freedom, actually making my own choices. Because as I said, I lost my freedom of choice. I gave my freedom of choice over as well to the addiction in a different way. So it's also about recognizing the need to have freedom of choice for both parties, and to give freedom of choice.
That's good. And we obviously touched on spousal relationships, significant other. What other kind of supporter relationships are there? Like maybe parental or things like that.
Parent.
I think parents is a really tough one. We have many parents that we see in our supporters groups that are very broken, and to kind of step back and to see your child go through a hard time and allow them to experience the negative consequences of their decisions is not easy. It's easy to say it, but it's not easy. So, for example, you could have a parent whose child is stealing from them to support their habit, but they allow them to continue staying in their house, to continue stealing, because the other options are too hard for a parent. But in that process, they're then enabling the addiction as well. So because the child is comfortable, again, there's no motivation to change as well. So I think parents, it's a really hard one. I think for everyone involved, it's hard. You've got colleagues at work that can be negatively affected. So a colleague at work, someone might be battling with addiction, taking time off work, the addiction costing time off work, and means that other colleagues have to pick up the work load, and have to cover for that person or whatever it is. So there's always a ripple effect. It's not just the loved one or the family. It goes beyond that.
And then Gareth, I think from your experience, if I'm right, you've had kind of been a supporter for both, from a parental point of view and a husband point of view. So what did you find a difference between those two relationships, or was it quite similar? Or?
No, different. And I think the main difference was to be a father in the space of in the space of addiction and in recovery, and not to control the outcome, and not to put on all the hats. So I couldn't be a recovery person to my son. I could be a father. But I think that's where the difficulty, the challenge really comes in, is where's that line between being a good father and enabling and allowing or protecting my son, or protecting, you know, do I kick him out the house? You know, if he's stealing, do I phone the police and he gets arrested? Am I willing to go through that for the better of my son? Or, you know, so it's those kind of things that are quite challenging for a parent, I think. And oftentimes, in my case, I think being a parent and then the husband, I was sitting in a codependent relationship. So the challenge was to not base myself or my feelings on how they were both feeling.
Easier said than done.
Far easier said than done.
So, I mean, you both have mentioned kind of letting kind of consequences happen, stuff like that.
For sure.
Like, what if there was a supporter who then, like, has a challenge with that? Like, is disagreeing with you, saying, no, you shouldn't let the consequences happen. Like, you know, sure, I love them, I can't let that happen. Like, how would you sort of respond to that?
I can speak on that. So for quite some time, this is with my son now, the correct way, I say the correct way, but the correct sort of recovery way would have been to kick him out the house at one point. But as a father, I made a decision not to. That's a decision I had to make, which went against recovery advice per se. However, it will play out. So it plays out. There are other extremes though, where Kerry alluded to, you know, stealing, abuse, you know, the son or child getting aggressive, that kind of aspect. So that's a different ball game, and that needs specific attention, whether it is phoning police or counselling services or some outside intervention, professional intervention in that manner.
I think what's important to understand is that addiction is an escalating, I don't want to say disease because it's more than that, you know. It escalates. Addiction doesn't just stay same thing every day. It escalates. So the reality is, if someone is in that situation, my first thing would be, well, how's it working out for you? Is there behavior? Is there change? And secondly, if this addiction continues to escalate, a year down the line, what do you think it's going to look like? If there's no intervention, if there's nothing, no major shift, what would the progression of that be? And what would it look like for you in your home? Because we often think, well, it's just, we kind of think if nothing changes, there will be changes. But actually, there needs to be changes made. And so we need to get serious about it, sometimes for the sake of the life of our child. You know, and that's vital,
To add there, and I think that's in a case of perhaps aggressive behaviour in the home, I would be asking, and, you know, if a parent came and said, this is the story, got an aggressive child, so, okay, well, the first thing is your safety, or that parent's safety in the home. So forget about the person in addiction for the moment.
Or the siblings
Or the siblings, yes. So forget about that individual. It's actually bring back the strength to, okay, well, let's look at the parents or the siblings, the rest of the family, make sure they're safe, deal with that. While we're dealing with that, perhaps the issue can de-escalate or hope whatever, but then we can come back to addressing the actual addiction. I think oftentimes the loved ones that are the supporters coming for help, it's an urgent matter, yet that problem's been there for quite some time, gently sort of, or sometimes not so gently, escalating along the way, and then reaches perhaps a crisis moment. So for me, the the way would be to keep them safe and then address the addiction or the addicted individual.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, Kerry, you mentioned that you know, with your husband, there were times where you wouldn't go to a camp, or like you obviously almost like neglect yourself for their sake. Gareth, did you find that in your journey, there were times where you were neglecting yourself for the sake of the others, and you kind of had to look at that?
I think in many ways, different to Kerry, where for sure I would put both my wife and my son's needs ahead of mine, more than what is healthy. Yeah. So to draw that distinction, there obviously there's a healthy as a parent and a husband, but to the degree that I kind of didn't worry about me, and that is unhealthy. So in that way, just making sure everything was fine as much as I could, doing things that they could do for themselves, yet I would then pick that up and do it just to make their life easier, or perhaps, so that they're fine.
Yes, yeah. Sure. And what is something that you have done recently to kind of find that sort of self-care or prioritizing yourself? Like, is it something practical that you've been able to implement?
Well, yes. So I think, one, it needs intentional work on it. As soon as I perhaps start to lax on putting things in place, so things like surfing, exercise, surfing in particular is important for me, gym, eating. So a lot of these sort of basic things, getting enough sleep, these, it's all sort of perhaps the in things these days, but it's to do it for oneself too, for myself, and I think to fill my own tank, as it were, and actually then put in the boundaries of, well, actually no, I'm not going to do this for you, or I can do that for you, but not right now. Instead of dropping everything, doing that, sacrificing something that I'm doing, just to pander to the loved one's needs, where actually could have been a sense of manipulation there. So it's quite complex, especially with the family dynamic, which Kerry also knows. So, so it's just to put in and maintain those mooring lines, as we call them, that keep me grounded in who I am. And it's important to fill those and do those regularly. Things like recovery groups, for an example, being part of the recovery community is vital.
Sure, so good. Kerry, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think for me, so because of the situation, mine was actually to go away for a weekend by myself. People don't believe it, but I'm actually more of an introvert. And so I refresh by being alone. I love people. I love engaging with people, but I need time by myself. And so my first time that I kind of did a retreat by myself was just absolutely amazing. Where I could just let things go and release everything to God and trust God and for whatever. And just really take some time out, spend time with Him, journal, process. So for me, that was one of the most amazing, freeing things for myself personally, was to take that time out. And I try and make it a yearly practice.
Well, thank you, guys. I think we've come to the end of today. Any just last comments you want to add? Or?
Yeah, I think from my side, we hesitated joining a recovery group because my husband, because he battled with pornography, and at that time the recovery group was mainly about substance use disorders. So we just thought, they'll never understand our journey. We're so unique. And actually we weren't. Not at all. But the moment we stepped into a recovery group where people where it was resolution orientated, life-giving, where I could speak, and I felt it was a safe environment to speak, and I felt heard. Something shifted in me, and I felt like the effects of this trauma started to minimize. And I knew that because before I'd try and read books around this issue, and I couldn't because it was just too traumatizing. After that, I found I could read books and I could identify, and I felt there was like a bit of something had shifted in me. But really to encourage people, don't walk this journey alone. There are so many people who understand, who are walking the same journey, and there's incredible power when we walk a journey together with others who understand and know the journey we're going through.
For sure.
Yeah.
So cool. Gareth, anything you want to add? Last comments?
Just the same sort of the value of going into a group where you actually heard. So oftentimes as a supporter, like we mentioned earlier, I feel like I haven't been heard. I feel like I haven't been seen. Yet going into a recovery group, I finally actually, I do have a voice. And in the recovery group, my voice can get stronger.
Sure.
And then to play that out, also realizing that for quite, I would blame my loved one for the addiction, for where we're at, which in all essence is true, yet the onus in a relationship, if we want it to become interdependent, is not based solely on what the one person does. So there's a choice to be made. So I need to work on myself and do my own recovery.
So good. Cool. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
joining in
Gerhardus.
today.
Thank you
It's
very
our
much.
pleasure.
Cool. And thank you for watching this week's episode. If you want to know more about Project Exodus, or want to get plugged into a group, or just find out more information, go to our website, www.projectexodus.net. And then if you are wanting any more information, like I said, you can go on the website. And if you want to, please share this to people that you think will benefit from hearing from this podcast, then please share it to them. And we'll see you next week for our next episode.